Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm very pleased to welcome you to a special episode of Sikh Channel Community Talks. And we have a very special guest with us today, Dabinderjit Singh Ji. Dabinderjit, welcome to Sikh Channel.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
It's been quite a while since you've been to the Sikh Channel studio. I think it's been perhaps a number of years now.
2 or 3 months ago, actually, believe it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great. And what was that occasion?
That was to do with the annual June event where we came to this very room, and Sikh Channel, obviously, we're promoting the fact that lots of people still remember what happened in 1984.
That's right.
I want to be there and remember.
That's right. Perhaps we can touch on that before we proceed.
Yeah.
Looking back or looking forward, we've got a number of questions from our viewers, and one of them is, why are we always looking back? We need to look forward, and we can't live in the past.
I think the key thing about the past is we should learn from the past. Being Sikhs, being learners all our lives, from the day we're born to the day we leave this earth, I always say we have something to learn from each other. We have something to learn from our elders, and sometimes we have things to learn even from our children. So I think it is important, like most communities, not just the Sikh community, you know, we talk about the world wars, you know, the remembrance events. People do remember. I'll touch on one small thing, because we can talk and talk. When the Queen passed away, all of a sudden, after all these years, people's faith, they might not go to the church or whatever, but all of a sudden, the central point of faith in this country, a lot of people probably did a lot of self-reflection. And I think that's the whole point, is we should all be learning, not just Sikhs, but non-Sikhs as well, from what's happened in the past, because it should help us, guide us for the future.
Absolutely. And I agree, and most people agree, we must be guided by history, and we must never forget our history. It's very important to preserve, but it is historic, a lot of the events that have occurred in the past, and we should move forward as a community. And before we go on, I would like the viewers to learn more about you personally,
Yeah.
because you're a public figure in the Sikh community, and you have a high profile in terms of your community work. But we want to know about Dabinderjit Singh. Where were you born, and your early life as a child?
Well, yeah, I think this is the fascinating thing. I was born here in the UK, so people that look at me might think grey hair, long beard. He probably wasn't born in the UK. But when they hear me speak English, they realise I speak English.
You speak like an English aristocrat.
I'll give you one. I'm full of these stories. I'll give you one. When I went to university in Cardiff, one of the cleaners came to clean my room, and she then told me, my Gujarati friend, you know, I was so embarrassed. I went to his room and I said, "Good morning." And she goes, "He spoke better English than I did." So in other words, sometimes by looking at someone, you arrive at conclusions.
Yes.
So my father came here in the 1950s. The challenges our forefathers had around their identity, many of them gave up their identity because they faced huge discrimination. And I've talked about this in many media places, even, you know, mainstream media, is in those days it didn't matter whether you were a Sikh, a Hindu or Muslim. Often it was men living in the same house before families started arriving, before people became affluent, and almost through logic started gaining independence, buying their own property. So back then the challenges were almost identical. Racism, you know, the right wing. You know,
is there still racism today? I mean, a lot of it's changed, it's been eliminated, or is it still there and hidden?
Far more sophisticated. Sometimes it comes out very publicly, where you have a Sikh man in Manchester attacked and somebody imprisoned. That happens. The man killed in Coventry, the elderly gentleman. Sometimes, and we're going to talk about this, it's far more sophisticated. And even today, you know, we have Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister. He's going to be far more closely scrutinised.
Rishi Sunak, whatever your political views may be, he's a brown person. I think it's a source of pride for a lot of people. We can't always empathise directly with Rishi because of his background in terms of wealth and education. There is elitism there, but he's still a brown person, and we should take some pride from that.
And just if you on Rishi Sunak, you know, because it's Rishi Sunak, every decision he makes as Prime Minister is going to be scrutinised ever more, and that affects. It's not just Rishi Sunak; it's you, it's me. When we're out there in the public domain, we have to be role models. We have to be even better, because the colour of our skin, the way we look, is potentially going to be used against us if we do the wrong things. That's where we have to be even better.
And how did that come into effect in your career? Because you worked at the National Audit Office. You're a chartered accountant by profession, but you chose to go into the independent civil service. And did you have to be much better?
I remember, and I've told the story at work as well, and I've talked on many things about how to break glass ceilings. So I left university, I went to Cardiff, I mentioned it earlier, and the bit I haven't touched upon is my parents always brought me up as a Sikh, so I've never cut my hair. So although I was born in 1965, I went to school, experienced all that racism, but my parents were my guiding figures, and I never compromised my swaroop and the way I looked. And there's a real reason, important reason, which I'll go on to about work. And what then happened was I took Amrit after I left university. It was my decision, and that's what it should always be, an individual decision when an individual feels they're ready. Right? So I've not always been an Amritari, but I've always had this identity. So in 1988, when I left university and started to work at the National Audit Office, you know, I probably had a decision to make. Should I tie my beard? And I chose, no. This is the way I've been. I'm comfortable with this, and this is where I'll go. And I remember in those early days, going on the London Underground, I had Bjorg, elders, chittiyan dastara, with their beards tied. Jappiyan paunde si. They were saying, Kamal karti. You're in a suit, you're going to work, the Dara Prakasi. When we started, we couldn't do this. Sorry, I'll keep going to Punjabi, but it's just natural. And I think that gives you a boost, because they felt proud that their younger generation. Now, I wear a Norquali pug. Now we see gold star barristers, people doing well in their professions, and I think that's how the community changes.
Absolutely. The confidence of the community has grown from the 70s and 80s. The confidence and ability to express ourselves is very different to what it used to be. But
just give you one example from work.
Have to be a pioneer in that way. Did you feel that as a burden, as well as having a sense of pride and duty? But was it a burden as well?
No, because I remember when I started work, my employers almost throughout my career were almost perfect employers, and you don't get that. I went to work, and within 6 months I remember somebody who'd been working there for 40 years. He was about to retire, and he wrote a report on me. He didn't have to write a report, and it used to be then there were no computers then, there were basically typewriters. He wrote a report by hand, and he made some very positive comments about myself. In the 40 years he's seen people go through that office. And a senior director said to him, "You can't write that. It's very glowing about Dabinderjit, but can you cross it out?" And he said, "I'm not crossing it out, that's what I believe." And the point was, I was a role model. All those people that perhaps never come across Sikhs almost thought I was the norm. And one very small story is, I used to chair graduate recruitment. You know, we take on about 70 graduates a year. And at one particular interview, a Sikh gentleman came along, was interviewed, not by me, but by someone who, and the gentleman wore a turban, but he trimmed his beard. And when we get together at the end of the day, and we discuss candidates, that person said, "You know, we ask questions about working in the public sector, commitment to those values that we stand for." So that person said, I asked him, "Are you committed to your faith?" Because they learnt from me that Sikhs should not really cut their hair. But I had to put that person right and saying, no, you can't ask questions like that. It's an individual choice. Part of me was saying, I felt really proud that a non-Sikh would ask a Sikh, why aren't they committed to their faith? But at the other time, we live in the world where you can't challenge that. It's illegal.
And also it's a judgment.
Yeah.
You can't pass judgment. Yeah. And the Sikh community has great diversity. We must celebrate that. There's diversity of views, people's looks. They choose their level
but every
of faith.
Sikh is an ambassador. That's what it boils down to.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I remember my eldest brother, who took that to heart, and he used to teach us that Sikhs are ambassadors, especially if you wear a turban, whether you have a beard or not, have a full beard and so on. But wearing a turban particularly was very important. You are an ambassador of the Sikh community. You must always behave impeccably, and that's important. But there is diversity in the community. And some of our viewers may agree with your political views, and many won't, and we accept that. There shouldn't be. Is there an emphasis sometimes on judging people if they don't accept your viewpoint?
I think it's all about what we started off with. Actually, we should learn to and listen to different viewpoints, and then if it makes us a better person by listening and reflecting, it may be, I haven't got all the answers, you haven't got all the answers, but you may hear someone say, actually, I never thought of it that way. And I think if we, as Sikhs, if we're in that...
There's no judgment. There's no good Sikh and bad Sikh. Because somebody doesn't follow a particular political agenda, they're not really a good Sikh, or they're not following their faith, or they're not...
We're all at different stages of our own personal paths. And, you know, and Maharaji Kirpa Karden.
Diversity should be welcomed. Absolutely. And in keeping with that, you've been a public servant all your life. Because as well as the National Audit Office, you've been closely involved in the Sikh Federation, a Sikh organisation with historic links going back many decades. And is that a dated organisation now? Has it done its time, or has it evolved?
I'll come back to that, but the one other thing to probably explain, in the year 2000, I was given an OBE. I was recommended by the National Audit Office where I worked, and Tony Blair recommended me for an OBE. And I could not believe it. I was in my early 30s. People in our office were often close to retirement. And I got it for my work at the National Audit Office and equal opportunities. And I remember to this day, and this is really important for your SIKH Channel viewers, I said, when I went to the investiture and got the OBE from the Queen, I don't deserve this. My father deserved this, because I know what he did for our community. But he was not visible to the establishment. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Therefore, I will use and abuse those 3 letters for the benefit of my community. And that's what I've done since the year 2000. So in 2003, Sikh Federation UK came into being as an organisation to encourage people to take part in mainstream politics. And I was just talking to some of your younger members of staff. I said, next year will be 20 years. That organisation. Where have we got to 20 years later as a community?
It's also a good question for the Sikh Federation. In 20 years of campaigning, canvassing and using vast resource in the community and having links to various Gurdwara, where has it got to? Some people will say it's been futile and perhaps not as progressive as it should have been.
I would challenge anyone to sit down and have a conversation around facts, because I talked around Sikh representation, and I know we're going to get on to that. So I was saying, back then, 20 years ago, we've had several Sikh MPs. But actually, if I asked some of the youngsters working here, they won't know them even by name. Because often, they were people born in India, didn't have the same, they had the issue with the language barrier. They could sit in Parliament for 15 years without speaking. What we had was a big change when 2 young Sikhs became MPs only 5 years ago. 5 and a bit years it's been, when Preet and Tan entered Parliament. And now it looks like we could be in double figures at the next general election. And that's the whole point. We have to take a longer term view of this. You can't just say, you know, if you're going to encourage people, and this is one issue, the other issue is our identity. There's lots of positives, but there's also challenges. You know, we've got the challenge of, you know, Jagtar Singh Johar. You know, a challenge we didn't have 5 years ago, but it's coming up to the 5th anniversary. That's a challenge where we can all get involved, because it could be our brother, it could be our son, And so I think there's different ways of looking at it.
Absolutely.
And when you've lived and breathed this every day, which is what I've done for more than 20 years, I openly challenge via SIKH Channel saying, let's have an open debate about what's been achieved, not by the Sikh Federation, but what's been achieved by our community over a period of time. And I would argue very strongly, and I argue this with non-Sikhs as well, our community is a role model community. We have our challenges, but we're not getting through as much as we should, given our contribution in the past and contribution.
Some of that, maybe a lot of it, is down to our own failings, a lack of unity, a lack of coordination.
Yeah. All those things are relevant.
Teamwork. Teamwork is the key. And the Sikh Channel motto has been from day one, bringing millions of Sikhs together.
Yeah.
Because through teamwork we can achieve so much more.
Yeah.
And coming on to your nomination, you were nominated for a life peerage, which is to become a member of the House of Lords.
Yeah.
And that's a very big step, and a very important step. Whilst the House of Lords is a second chamber and it is not an elected body, it still has quite a lot of influence. And how did you come to be nominated?
Yeah. So Davinder Singh, this is probably the crux of the programmes we're doing. So on the 9th of November 2020, I received a phone call from the Chief of Staff for the Labour leader, because a lot of peerages in this country tend to be political peerages. So the Prime Minister of the day, working with other party leaders, say, we're going to make life peerages, you can make X. So that year, Keir Starmer was told he could nominate 6 people. So I received that phone call, and it's almost been 2 years. I received that phone call, and Morgan McSweeney, who was the Chief of Staff, and I spoke to him only last week, said, congratulations, Keir Starmer is nominating you for the House of Lords. We've heard good things from Preet Kaur Gill and Dabinderjit Singh about you, our 2 Sikh MPs. Both happen to be Labour. And you now need to fill in a consent form. So basically anyone, and a lot of people don't know how the process works, so anyone nominated has to first sign a consent form. I think I've even sent you a copy of that. There's not many of you who have even seen it. They sign a consent form, and that starts the process then of vetting, of checking of that individual. It happens to all peers. And so 9th of November 2020, I get nominated, I fill in the consent form, and on the 3rd of December 2020, the House of Lords Appointments Commission, which do the vetting, they rely on MI5, MI6, the police, the tax people. They check your social media accounts, anything you might have written publicly, and they then advise the Prime Minister of the day, is this person suitable or not? And we hear all sorts of controversies about all sorts of people. In my case, I got the message on the 3rd of December, the House of Lords Appointments Commission have raised no issues about you. Your name has now gone to the Prime Minister and Buckingham Palace. Now, firstly, you keep this information to yourself. Your family might know, but it's all very secretive until you're officially announced. The next thing that happens is it's a bit of a waiting game, because you're not sure when there's going to be a public announcement. So the Labour leader in the House of Lords, Baroness Angela Smith, she's the person I've been talking to regularly. You know, she's talking about what should be in my maiden speech, you know, and I was saying, hold on a minute, that hasn't happened yet.
So it was almost a given.
It wasn't just a given. I'll explain. So on the 22nd of December 2020, at 11 o'clock in the morning, Baroness Angela Smith phones me, and she says, Dabinderjit, the Cabinet Office have just told us 17 life peers will be announced at 2 o'clock today. Can you submit your resignation from the National Audit Office? And I'll explain why. So you've resigned before 2 o'clock, and the reason is, I was a director at the National Audit Office. The National Audit Office have to be independent of party politics.
Yes.
So I'm in what's called a politically restricted role.
A potential conflict
So
of
my
interest.
work knew all about it. So I submitted my resignation. The head of the National Audit Office accepted my resignation, congratulated me, and I was dealing with 2 press offices, the Labour Party press office and the National Audit Office press office.
And have you got all this in email?
I've got, not just in emails, I've got all sorts of things documented. At 1 o'clock, So 1 hour before the public announcement, I get a message from the Deputy Chief of Staff, Helen Reardon Bond. And the reason why I'm mentioning these names, she was the head of equalities in government in the Cabinet Office in her previous role. So she knew the people in the Cabinet Office. And she said, Dabinderjit, your name has been leaked and there is a hate campaign that's been started against you. This is what is being widely circulated. So she shared it with me.
And when was that?
That was at 1 o'clock before the 2 o'clock announcement. So I'd already
December.
resigned, 22nd of December 2020. Now, at 1:30, I was still getting phone calls from the Labour leader in the House of Lords. Don't worry about this. This happens when leaks happen. It could happen to anyone. Just deal with the 2 press officers. And I did that. At 1 minute past 2, 2 o'clock deadlines again, I get a phone call from Helen Reardon Bond. And she explains, she goes, look, you know I was a senior civil servant in that team. I went to them and said, can you give us an extra 24 hours to deal with this hate campaign? Because we want to protect Dabinderjit. They said, look, there's 17 live peerages that are supposed to be announced. We'll have to delay everyone's. What we'll do is we'll announce 16, and your 1 slot, because Labour had 6 slots, they only announced 5 that day. The 1 slot we'll hold back, and there's a strong possibility in January 2021, next month, that you'll be able to announce Dabinderjit's name. And this is what I was told, that we pulled your name to protect you.
So it's a lot of intrigue there and a lot of backtracking, and they got cold feet. And why is that? Are you a controversial figure? I mean, many Sikh committee will know you, and many will agree, and there'll be many more who will disagree with some of your political views, but that's a respectful position. Everybody can have different views, and there's nothing wrong with that. Somebody can be Labour or Liberal or Conservative and so on. And you've always been a peaceful campaigner and a civil servant and a public servant to the community.
I got the highest security clearance because I've worked in defence.
Absolutely.
You know.
So why did Labour, after nominating you and being so certain, at the very last minute get such cold feet?
So this is the intriguing thing, and the reason why...
Perhaps we don't know why.
No, I know exactly why, and that's why we're doing this show on SIKH Channel. So your viewers, and we're doing this...
If I apologies, Dabinderjit, if I can interrupt you, that's for the next episode, because I wanted to set the scene in this episode, and we'll come on to the intrigue as to how you were nominated and almost handed, almost virtually given the lordship, and then it was snatched away from you. We'll come on to that in the next episode. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.